Hello, welcome to Share It with Merit. I'm Merit. In today's video, I'm going to share some thoughts on what is happiness. It's a word that gets used a lot, especially in our American culture. We even have it in our Declaration of Independence that we have a right to pursue it, which is interesting. It means it needs to be pursued, right? It's not just given. It's not something that just happens without some effort. And I think that's very important and very true. We are not born in a state of happiness. We're born in a state, frankly, of anxiety and fear and trying to survive, right? And I've talked about that in other videos about this negativity bias that we're really born as our default setting, right? Happiness is in the thriving realm. So how do we go from surviving to thriving? And one of the ways we do that is by discovering what makes us happy. Well, and what happiness is for each of us, because it's different for everybody. And then how do I obtain that happiness? You know, I even pulled up the Merriam-Webster's definition. So I thought, well, let's start there. So here's what Merriam-Webster has to say, that the definition of happiness is A, state of well-being and contentment, and B, a pleasurable or satisfying experience. And it's interesting to me because those are almost like a state and a trait, right? So you can have a state of well-being, which is prolonged and more of a resilience like that you have on a regular basis. And it's also that would be the trait. I always get those mixed up. So a trait of well-being and contentment versus a state of sort of happiness and exuberation and, you know, a really fun time, right? So you have your trait of happiness and your state of happiness, according to Merriam-Webster. And I would agree with that. And so I think it gets confusing. I think that a lot of times we think that happiness is being, you know, rainbows and teddy bears all the time. And it's not, because that's not sustainable, right? Excuse me. Every day is not going to be rainbows and teddy bears. I mean, you know, shoot for that. And I don't want to discourage anyone from trying that. But what I can say is that the trait of contentment and well-being is very much attainable. And frankly, when you are able to attain that, then those pleasurable moments of happiness and real joy and elation actually feel like it, because you know you can't sustain anything up there, because then it becomes your baseline and doesn't feel like it anyway, right? So what you really want to be striving for, in my opinion, is that trait of happiness, that trait of contentment and peace. Frankly, you know, if we're born in a state of fear and anxiety, the antidote to that is to bring yourself into a fear of calm safety, right? Well, okay, so how do we get there? Well, this thing between our ears, right, is perhaps the most powerful thing in the universe. And if it's working against you, you're going to stay in a state of fear and you're going to stay in a state of anxiety, because that's its default setting, remember. Okay. If it's working for you, imagine the possibilities, right? And it really is a matter of gaining control over this thing, right? We tend to think that we can control all this stuff outside of ourselves, and we try to make order out of a chaotic, at times, world by trying to control things outside of us. And to some extent, that can be very helpful. You know, I often tell people, you know, on a day where you're feeling really out of control and highly anxious, pick one thing that you can control. I don't care if it's the laundry or, you know, watching your favorite TV show, going for a hike, whatever it is, find something that you do feel you can control, right? That's going to help balance you and settle you back into that trait of well-being and contentment. Okay. But think about it this way, you know, everything that whatever we focus on and how we interpret the world is how we experience the world. Okay. So if you think the world is out to get you, it is. If you think the world is amazing and beautiful and loving and kind, it is, right? You've probably heard that saying, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. This is why your mindset is critical when it comes to happiness and well-being. And actually, I had a session with a client this week, and she came to session with a quote that really resonated with her. And I don't remember it entirely, but the gist was, and I remember the very first sentence was, if you focus on what disturbs you, you will be disturbed. Right. And it led to a really rich conversation about, okay, but where is that line between addressing what is disturbing you and honoring those feelings and not letting it ruin the rest of your day, week, month, or even your life, right? Because sometimes if we stay in a fixated negative mindset, that's going to be our life experience, right? I did a video on something called the 95% life. And that's where, most days we have the opportunity to do this work, to choose what we focus on, right? If I tell you, to go and notice how many, silver Hondas you see this week, guess what you're going to see? You're going to see a lot of silver Hondas, okay? So when we set our mindset and we set that what we filter for, that's how that's the step one. That's the information that's going to filter through, right? And then the second step is, well, how do we interpret that? But let me go back to that piece about the feeling of disturbance, right? Because it's an important concept there in terms of our happiness. I often say that the most direct route to more happiness is actually right through your pain. Okay. So when you're disturbed, I'm not saying ignore those feelings at all. In fact, quite the opposite. They're trying to get your attention, to tell you something. They're saying, hey, something is not right in your environment. Pay attention. Okay. Your job then is to pay attention and say, oh, well, what is disturbing me? What is causing this disturbance? Right. So you consult with executive functioning, right? And hopefully you're able to interpret that feeling accurately. And then you can do something about it, right? And if there's an action to take, or sometimes not take, then fine. Do the thing that's going to address that disturbance. Maybe someone in your, close circle did something and you felt, say, disrespected, right? So take that information and say, hey, when this happened, I felt disrespected, and what I would like is X, right? So you share your experience from your perspective and you ask for what you would like. Okay. And then you move on, right? What you don't want to do is stay fixated on, well, they did this and they did that, and how dare they, and they are always doing this, and you know where it goes, right? And staying stuck in that, perseverating on whatever it may be that's disturbing you. Okay. Because that's going to block your happiness, right? The more you stay in struggle and in conflict with anything, the more you're holding up that energy for that contentment, that peace, right? So one important component is to actually pay attention to any uncomfortable feelings. And again, I don't call them negative feelings. I call them uncomfortable, and they're just there to get your attention, right? We can't feel content or peace while we're sitting with discomfort or disturbance, right? So we need to address the disturbance, right? If you shove it down and ignore it, I'm just going to be happy today, good luck, right? Those feelings are like, no, you must pay attention to me. I'm here to tell you something very important. Okay, please listen to me. And if you shove me down, I'm going to get louder. I'm going to make your body more uncomfortable, right? All those stress hormones get released. You will have a stomach ache, a backache, right? I mean, the emotions need to be respected, right? And by respecting them, they're allowed, then they can move on. They go, oh, you got the message. Well, let me move on. So you can now go out and decide, well, what do I want to focus on, right? Because I addressed my disturbance. I said my piece, asked for what I want, or in some cases you may decide it's not the time or the place to do that, that's okay too. The point is just listen to the feeling, the emotion, and make an informed decision about it, right? The system is really one whole system. Your feeling and your thinking, they're actually not separate. And you want to use them in conjunction with each other. Okay, because they're both very, very, very valuable, right? You don't want to stay just in emotions and reacting to things all the time. And you don't want to stay just in your logical self, minimizing and overthinking, right? You really want to get the best of both, right? And that is really how you can start to get to that sustained place of contentment. The next piece is about, well, what is it that you do want to focus on? Excuse me. Take a sip of water here. And then I'm going to wrap up. So, well, part of the difficulty, and I see this a lot, is a lot of us don't even know what we want and what makes us happy, right? So it's easier sometimes to let life just kind of unfold and unravel and happen to you. And it will. That's what I'm saying. The world is just out there happening, right? It's not against you. It's not for you. It's just there, right? So if you want to have a particular experience, you've got to make that happen, right? You have to create, you have to, as I say, define and design the life that you want for yourself and that you deserve to have. And frankly, that takes work, right? Because again, it's not our default setting. So with that said, I am going to wrap up because I'm going to invite you to go to my website, shareitwithmerit.com, and download my workbook there called The Recipe for Happiness. And there's a video that goes with that walks you through it. But it's really a kind of a place to start to help you come up with your own recipe for happiness, because what makes you happy will be different than what makes me happy or what makes someone else happy. There are some universals, like, purpose and meaning in life, being of service to others. Those are some pretty common universal components of happiness. But then there's very specific things, right? Having pets, cooking, hiking, gardening, whatever is specific to you. And so this workbook kind of helps you develop a very robust recipe for happiness. And then at least you've got the template there. You've got the blueprint, the recipe, as I call it. And then the work begins, right? So, but I wanted to walk through some of this, and especially in terms of taking control over, frankly, your mindset. That is going to drive whatever you feel, right? How you interpret things and what you focus on. Okay, check it out, shareitwithmerit.com, and I'll see you next time.